What if I told you the path to greatness is not crowded, but completely empty? No friends, no applause, just pain, silence, and the sound of your own heartbeat. Most people run from it, but a few, very few, walk straight into it, alone. This is not just a speech. It is the truth they never wanted you to hear. Stay with me till the end, because by the time it's over, you will never fear walking alone again. The wind howled through the empty alley. Darkness hung heavy in the air, thick like smoke. Streetlights flickered above, cold and distant. Every step echoed, sharp against cracked concrete. He walked alone. No friends, no guidance, only shadows for company. His heart pounded like a war drum. Eyes scanned the silence. Nothing moved, but something was watching. The city had turned its back. Doors locked, windows shuttered. Not a soul in sight. Fear whispered at the back of his neck. A chill slithered down his spine. The scent of rust and rain filled his nose. He clenched his fists. His breath turned sharp. Every corner looked the same. Every turn led nowhere. But he kept walking. Memories clawed at his mind. Betrayals. Lies. Smiles that hid daggers. He once trusted. He once waited. But they left him in the dark. And now, the dark had become his ally. Thunder cracked. Rain poured, drenching his coat. But he did not stop. Not for the storm. Not for the fear. The world had told him to kneel. They mocked him. They laughed behind screens. They pointed with poisoned tongues. But wolves do not howl for applause. They do not beg for the pack. They survive. They adapt. They evolve. And tonight, under the black sky, he chose the path no one dared to tread. A path of silence. A path of scars. A path of power. His boots splashed through puddles of broken dreams. His eyes, wide open, burned with fury. He could feel the weight of the world pressed down. But deeper inside, something cracked. Not with weakness. Not with surrender. But with the roar of awakening. Pain surged like fire through his veins. Every nerve screamed. Every bone trembled. But he smiled. Because in that pain, he found purpose. In that silence, he found strength. And in that moment of isolation, he became unstoppable. He was no longer waiting for help. No longer hoping for rescue. He was the storm now. He was the threat in the dark. He was the lone wolf the world would learn to fear. He moved forward with the unshakable focus of something reborn. No longer the boy who once doubted. No longer the man who waited for others to see his worth. He carved his value into the earth with each footstep. Every rejection became fuel. Every insult became armor. They had pushed him to the edge, but they never expected him to fly. The rain soaked through to his skin, cold and merciless, but he did not flinch. His body ached. His muscles burned, but his spirit was a wildfire, raging higher with every breath. The buildings loomed over him like silent judges, but their glares no longer mattered. He had faced their courts. He had endured their verdicts. And now he was beyond their reach. He had walked away from comfort, left behind the easy path, not because he wanted to suffer, but because the easy path was a cage, and he was born to break it. They once told him he was nothing, that he would fail, that without them, he would collapse. But they never realized. The lone wolf does not collapse. He adapts. He learns the terrain. He sharpens his instincts. He becomes dangerous. The world is cruel to those who walk alone. It tries to make them doubt. It starves them of love. It tempts them with comfort. But he saw through the illusion. He had been comforted by lies. Now, he chose truth, no matter how bitter. He had been held up by false hands. Now he held himself up. He did not need their applause. He did not crave their cheers. Because he had found something greater, something unshakable. He had found himself. The street narrowed. Trash scattered like fallen hopes. Graffiti screamed rebellion across the walls. Every inch of the alley reeked of defeat. But to him, it smelled like home. Like battle. Like becoming. He did not fear the fight anymore. He welcomed it. He chased it. Because the fire inside him had grown too loud to ignore. He remembered the nights he cried into a pillow. Silently. So no one would hear. The days he wore a fake smile. Pretending he was fine while breaking inside. He remembered begging for help, only to hear silence. He remembered how people promised to be there, only to disappear when the sky darkened. That was when he learned, not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Not everyone who claps for you wants to see you win. Some wait for your downfall, just to feel better about their own. But he no longer played that game. He was not in it for the likes, not in it for the fake friends. He was in it for war. War with his weakness. War with his excuses. War with every lie he had once believed. His scars told stories. His silence spoke louder than any speech. And his eyes, they no longer looked for approval. They searched for targets, opportunities, paths no one dared to walk. He walked past closed doors, past forgotten dreams, past the echoes of who he used to be. He was not the same man who started this journey. That man had died. This man, this lone wolf, had been born from the ashes. The world had not handed him strength. It tried to bury him, but he clawed his way back. And with every step, he proved them wrong. The moon broke through the clouds, casting a pale light on his face. He did not look up. He did not need guidance from above. His path was already written in blood, in sweat, in solitude. They said walking alone was dangerous. They were right. It was. But he was more dangerous than anything he would face. He did not fear loneliness. He had made peace with it. He had dined with demons, fought with shadows, and come out stronger. He no longer waited to be chosen. He chose himself. And that choice, that one fearless decision, changed everything. It is easy to walk with a crowd, to blend in, to stay small. But greatness does not live there. It lives in the ones who walk alone, in the ones who embrace the silence, in the ones who carry their pain like a weapon. So he kept walking, not toward safety, not toward applause, but toward truth, toward destiny, toward the version of himself the world was never ready for. Because wolves do not follow maps. They follow instinct. They follow hunger. And he was starving for freedom, for meaning, for vengeance, not on others, but on the weak version of himself he had left behind. He walked like the storm itself. No hesitation, no turning back, every step louder than a scream. Because when the lone wolf walks, the world listens, the world watches, and sometimes it trembles. He was not lost. He was not broken. He was rising, from failure, from silence, from the ruins of everything they thought would destroy him. And when the sun would rise, because it always does, it would rise on a different man, a man made in the furnace of solitude. And no one could take that from him. Not time, not doubt, not even fear itself. He did not need a crowd to roar. His footsteps were enough, louder than applause, sharper than judgment. He walked alone, like a lone wolf. And that was exactly where his power began. He stepped into the open street, the echo of his footsteps fading behind him, replaced now by a heavier silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm, heavy with the scent of wet asphalt, thick with the weight of something unsaid, something brewing in the air. He could feel eyes on him, not from people, but from the city itself. The walls, the wires, the broken glass. They watched. They remembered. Every building stood like a monument to the weak, who had turned back. He did not turn back. He never would, because he knew something most do not. The path forward is forged in pain, and pain, if endured, becomes power. The lone wolf does not wait for the pack to understand. He moves before they see the danger. He acts before they form their questions. By the time they notice, he is already gone, already ahead. Each step forward was not just movement. It was a declaration, a defiance, a refusal to bend. He thought of the ones who mocked his ambition, the ones who called him obsessed, crazy, unreasonable. He remembered how they laughed when he said he would make it, how they turned their backs the moment life grew uncomfortable. They disappeared when he needed support. But now they would see, not because he needed revenge, not because he craved their regret, but because he owed it to himself. He owed it to the fire that never stopped burning in his chest. The wolf does not howl for validation. He howls because it is in his nature to rise above the silence. He does not fear being alone. He fears being average. He fears waking up one day and realizing he became what they wanted, instead of who he was meant to be. A car passed slowly by, its headlights slicing through the darkness. He turned his head slightly, but did not stop. He kept moving, because the true battle was not behind him. It was ahead, not a battle of fists, not a battle with enemies, but a war with doubt, a war with procrastination, laziness, distraction, a war with that voice in his head that said, "You are not enough." But he had heard that voice before. He knew its lies. He had stared into the mirror long enough to recognize truth from fiction. And the truth was simple. He was not born strong. He became strong, not in comfort, but in the cold, not with praise, but with pressure, not through company, but through solitude. Every night he spent alone built him. Every tear he never showed shaped him. Every silent scream in the dark became part of his strength. He did not need to shout. He did not need to explain. His life would be the answer. His actions would speak in storms. Let the others chase likes. Let them live for applause. He would chase purpose. He would live for legacy. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. He felt the weight of time pressing on his shoulders, the seconds ticking by like falling blades. Every moment wasted was a step further from greatness, and he refused to waste another. The lone wolf does not wait for motivation. He moves with discipline. When tired, when broken, when doubted, he keeps going when others sleep, when others party, when others quit, because he knows one truth above all. Discomfort is the birthplace of champions, and he had made discomfort his home. He reached a crossroad, a literal fork in the road, one path lit by street lamps, the other swallowed by blackness. Most would choose the light, the known, the safe. He turned without hesitation, into the dark, into the unknown, because safety was not his goal. Growth was. Mastery was. Becoming something no one could ignore was. The wind struck again, fiercer this time. Like a test. Like a final question. Are you sure? And he smiled, because the answer was not just yes. It was carved into his bones. It was inked in the way he walked. It was echoed in every lonely night. He had survived. He had nothing to prove to the world, but everything to prove to himself. He had once begged for mercy from life. Now he dared it to challenge him. He had once prayed for strength. Now he was the storm that others prayed to withstand. His pace quickened, not because of fear, but because the hunger grew. Hunger for excellence, for dominance, for that moment when he would stand at the summit and know with absolute certainty that he had earned every inch. Let them take the elevators. Let them take shortcuts. He would take the stairs. He would crawl if he had to, because the fight builds more than muscle. It builds soul. It builds grit. He could feel it now deep inside. The beast they tried to tame. The fire they tried to smother. It was awake. And once a lone wolf awakens to who he truly is, nothing can stop him. Not time. Not loss. Not failure. Because he does not see failure as the end. He sees it as the forge, as the hammer that shapes him, as the lesson that others run from. But he walked straight into. He passed a shattered window, his reflection jagged and imperfect. But he did not flinch, because he no longer needed perfection. He needed progress. He needed truth. And the truth was brutal, but it was his, and it was beautiful in its own savage way. He would keep walking, mile after mile, year after year, until the road itself remembered his name. And when others asked where he had been, why they never saw him in the crowd, he would not answer, because lone wolves do not explain. They arrive. They conquer. They disappear again. He would walk until his silence became a legend, until his presence sent chills, until his journey carved a path so deep that others would follow, but never quite catch him, because he had chosen the hardest road, the loneliest road, the road of no applause, no handouts, no comfort, and that road would break many, but it would make him. He walked alone, like a lone wolf, and that was the very reason he would never be forgotten. He kept walking, step after step, deeper into the night, through narrow lanes twisted with rusted fences and vines that strangled forgotten buildings. His breath, warm against the cold, vanished into the air like ghosts. And every inhale tasted of dust, iron, and the raw scent of rain-soaked concrete. He passed windows lit faintly from within, rooms full of comfort, laughter, lives that had chosen the safer path. He did not stop, because he knew those lights came with chains, invisible ones made of compromise, fear, and comfort disguised as love. He remembered when he too once craved those rooms, craved a hand to hold, a voice to say, "You are enough." But no one came, and when he stopped waiting, when he finally rose alone, he discovered something they never taught in those warm-lit houses. You are never truly alive until you have survived without anyone. Every brick in his soul had been set by pain. Every wall he built had been reinforced by silence. There were no blueprints, no mentors, no guidebooks, only scars, and the brutal language of trial and error. He had fallen hard. He had failed repeatedly. But each failure was not a wall. It was a doorway, a door only the relentless could walk through. He could hear the sound of a distant train rumbling through the city, a reminder of time moving forward with or without him. But he was not afraid of time. He respected it. He fought against it. He built with it. He did not waste a second on guilt, on the apologies he would never receive, on the forgiveness that others refused to give. Because he had learned, you do not owe the world softness when the world has given you steel. A stray dog passed by him, limping, ribs visible, but eyes sharp. They locked eyes for a second, two survivors in the same storm, and then both turned away, knowing that in some silent way, they were mirrors. He walked past a shuttered store, its broken neon sign, flickering a half-dead word open. Irony, but truth too, because life never truly closes for the determined, not even when the world pretends it has. The street dipped into a tunnel, dark, cold, humming with echoes that belonged to no one. He entered it without pause, because he knew what others feared in the dark. He had already faced inside himself. That voice, the cruel one, the one that said he would never be great, never be enough, that he was wasting his time. He had silenced it not by arguing, but by proving it wrong. He trained in secret, worked when no one watched, sacrificed pleasures others considered non-negotiable. He built his body like a weapon, sharpened his mind like a blade, and tempered his soul like steel and fire. He did not want to be the best among men. He wanted to be the version of himself that no one believed could exist. The tunnel grew darker, damp walls pressing in, every sound bouncing like whispers from the past. But he kept walking, because light was not what he needed. He was his own fire now. He remembered the ones who told him to be realistic, the ones who said, "Do not dream too big. Be grateful for what you have. Play it safe." But safety is where dreams go to rot, and he had buried too many parts of himself already. He was done playing small to make others comfortable. He was done waiting for green lights from people still stuck at the starting line. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous, because when a man walks alone long enough, he stops fearing isolation. He starts fearing complacency. He starts chasing the version of himself who exists just beyond the pain. The tunnel opened suddenly, and the city stretched out before him, a glowing beast of chaos and beauty. He stood at its edge, not in awe, but in challenge. He whispered, not to the city, but to himself, "I did not come this far to bow now." He would rise, not just for revenge, not just for victory, but because he knew the fire in his soul could light the path for others too, others who had been left behind, others who were told they were not enough, others who walked alone. He did not speak empty words. He lived them, bled for them, died and was reborn through them, because lone wolves do not beg to be heard. They become so powerful that the world has no choice but to listen. The streets were wider now, louder. Cars sped by. People bustled on sidewalks. But he did not blend in. He moved like a different species, focused, unshakable, untouchable. Every man he passed looked like a prisoner of comfort, every woman distracted by a glowing screen. No one noticed him, and that was fine, because the true revolution happens in silence. It begins in dark places, in unseen corners, in lonely hearts that decide enough is enough. He would not announce his success. He would not post his battles. He would not flaunt his pain. He would let the results scream. Let the actions thunder. Let the winds arrive like avalanches. And one day, they will ask where he came from, who trained him, who gave him permission, and the answer will burn in the sky like fire. No one trained him. No one gave him permission. He trained himself. He gave himself permission, because he was a lone wolf. And the lone wolf does not rise by accident. He rises by decision, by sacrifice, by a relentless refusal to break. He would walk through every storm, climb every wall, face every enemy, even the one within. He would not stop until he reached the place the world said was impossible. And even then, he would not stop, because for the lone wolf, there is no finish line, only the next hunt, the next mountain, the next version of self that waits to be unlocked, through fire, through solitude, through pain, and through purpose. He moved through the swelling noise of the waking city, but inside him, there was only silence, a powerful silence, the kind that follows a decision made with absolute clarity. Every step now was not just progress, it was prophecy, a fulfillment of every quiet vow he had whispered to himself in the dark. When no one believed, when even he had almost given up, he remembered those nights, sleepless, breathless, lying in a room so still it felt like a coffin, staring at a cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of an old fan, trying to keep his soul from falling apart. But he had not fallen apart. He had melted, then molded, then emerged, like steel forged in the heat of despair, like a storm born from silence. He turned into an alley, graffiti-covered walls flanking him like ruins of forgotten wars. A cat darted across his path, startled, wild-eyed. The air grew heavy again. It was not fear. It was awareness. He could feel the weight of eyes, somewhere behind a dumpster, above a rooftop, or maybe inside his own mind. But he did not flinch. He had danced with paranoia before. He had stared into the eyes of danger, and dared it to strike, because he had nothing left that could be taken. His pride, it had already been shattered, rebuilt, shattered again. His comfort, long gone. His innocence, burned away in the fires of betrayal and survival. All that remained was resolve, cold, sharp, and endless. The alley ended at a metal fence. Sharp wires lined the top like teeth. He climbed it without hesitation, hands scraping against rust, blood marking his grip. He landed on the other side and kept walking. Pain was not a signal to stop. It was a sign that he was alive, that he was moving, that he was still in the fight. He passed a mirror nailed crookedly to a wall. His reflection looked like someone halfway between human and legend. Eyes like storms, jaw set in stone, muscles tense like drawn bows. That was not the boy who once begged for approval. That was not the man who once feared being alone. This was something else. This was the result of years of pain endured in silence. This was evolution in its purest form. He had become what others would never understand, not because he was better, but because he had bled longer, because he had walked when others sat, because he had endured when quitting would have been mercy. He moved now with urgency, not rushed, but deliberate. He was not running from anything. He was running toward himself, toward his vision, toward that place only he could see. People crossed his path now. Workers, students, drifters. They moved without looking up, without realizing they had just passed a storm disguised as a man. He did not expect them to see it. How could they? They had not felt what he had felt. They had not buried versions of themselves again and again, just to be reborn harder, colder, clearer. He stopped at an abandoned rail yard. Broken trains sat like rusted beasts sleeping in the fog. The mist swirled around his feet, and for a moment, he felt the past try to call him back. The memories came. The moment he was told he would never make it. The moment he was left behind. The moment he stood at a cliff, ready to end it. But he had not ended it. He had turned, faced the pain, and made it his fuel. He stood now, not as a victim of his past, but as proof that survival is not enough. You must conquer. You must rise. You must terrify the limits that once defined you. He walked onto the train tracks, each wooden beam like a heartbeat, each metal rail like a path carved in fire. He whispered again, not loud, just enough for the wind to carry. I do not walk this path for anyone else. I walk it for the man I promised I would become. The tracks stretched forward into gray. He followed without hesitation, because he knew the truth. No one is coming. No one is going to carry you. No one is going to see your vision the way you do. And that is the way it should be. Because visions are not inherited. They are earned. The lone wolf does not howl for attention. He howls to remind the mountains that he is still alive, still climbing, still hungry. And hunger is the only compass he trusts. Not comfort, not fame, not applause. Only that gnawing fire in his chest, that madness behind his eyes, that refusal to accept mediocrity. He kept walking, past the end of the rail yard, into the mist, into the unknown, where the path disappeared beneath his feet. And he smiled, because that is where the rail journey begins, where roads do not exist, where maps are lies, where only instinct and obsession remain. And he had both, in overwhelming measure. He had walked long enough to know, if no one is with you, you are on the right path. If everyone understands you, you are not dreaming big enough. If you are comfortable, you are not growing. He walked faster, not to escape, but to evolve, to reach that impossible version of himself, who waits just a little further, just one more mile, one more hour, one more sacrifice away. The world may forget his name, but it will never forget his impact, because when you walk alone long enough, you stop trying to be remembered. You focus only on becoming unforgettable. And he was not done. Not yet. He still had miles to walk, battles to win, demons to tame, legends to write, all by himself, all alone, like a lone wolf. He stepped beyond the mist, where the air felt thinner, sharper, as if the world itself was testing him, whispering, "Are you sure you want to keep going?" But he had already answered that question, long ago, on a night when his soul broke into pieces. And he gathered them, one by one, with trembling hands, and swore to build something indestructible. Now, his breath formed clouds in front of him, each exhale a promise to the man he was becoming. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the earth, steady, relentless, refusing to slow. He passed a crumbling overpass, where weeds grew between shattered concrete, and birds circled above like omens. The world here felt forgotten. But he had not come to be seen. He had come to remember. He paused at the edge of a ravine, where the path split. One way led to ease, a paved road winding through safety. The other was raw, bare rock and thorns, untamed, uninviting. He chose the thorns, not because he wanted pain, but because he understood it. He knew pain was not the enemy. Stagnation was. Mediocrity was. The slow death of unlived potential was. Every scratch, every drop of blood, every ache in his bones, they were proof. Proof that he had not quit. Proof that he was still moving, still changing, still becoming. He walked with purpose, eyes locked on a future no one else could see. It was not a fantasy. It was a mission. It was etched into his spirit, branded into his mind with every sleepless night, every ignored call, every moment of isolation that taught him to be his own friend, his own teacher, his own army. He remembered the faces, the ones who laughed when he dreamed, the ones who warned him not to chase too far, not to want too much, not to believe in the impossible. They spoke from fear, but called it wisdom, and he thanked them silently, because without their doubt, he would not have found his fire. Without their silence, he would not have learned to scream through action. Without their absence, he would not have mastered presence. The path grew steep now, his muscles burning, his breath quickening, but he kept going, because he had already died 1,000 small deaths, and this pain was nothing compared to what he had already survived. He reached a plateau, where the sky opened wide above him, and wind cut across his face like a blade. He stood tall, legs shaking, heart pounding, eyes alive. From this height, he saw how far he had come, the broken streets, the sleepless cities, the silent tunnels, all behind him now. But he did not feel triumph. He felt hunger. The climb had only begun. The fire inside him had only grown. There were no cheering crowds here. No applause. No banners. Just wind, and sky, and silence. But that was all he needed. Because he did not walk for recognition. He walked for redemption. He walked for that boy who once cried alone in the dark. For that teenager who was told he would never make it. For that man who sat on the floor one night and almost gave up. He walked for every version of himself that refused to die quietly. He looked toward the horizon, where mountains rose like sleeping giants, and shadows danced across jagged peaks. That was where he was going, not to conquer the mountains, but to conquer himself, to prove that the voice inside him, the one that said keep going, had always been right. He tightened the laces on his boots, rolled his shoulders back, and took another step, and then another, and another, each step an answer to the world's doubt, each stride a declaration. I am not here to follow. I am not here to blend in. I am not here to be accepted. He was here to become a force, to write his story in sweat and sacrifice, to be the man who kept walking, long after others sat down, to be the one who did not need permission, validation, or applause. The wind howled louder, but he smiled, because now he could hear it differently. It did not sound like resistance anymore. It sounded like a welcome, like the world itself was opening for him. Because when you walk long enough, when you suffer long enough, when you refuse to give up no matter how alone you feel, the world stops trying to break you. It starts trying to see how far you can go. He would show it, step by step, hour by hour, failure by failure, rise by rise. And in the end, they would not call him lucky. They would not call him gifted. They would call him inevitable, because he had done what others feared. He had walked alone, and in doing so, he had become more than just a man. He had become a legend, a symbol, a living reminder that the lone wolf may walk without a pack, but he walks without limits. And he was not done. Not now. Not ever. Because when you walk alone long enough, you stop chasing the world, and you make the world chase you. He pressed forward, the wind slicing past him like a warning. Yet he welcomed it. Every gust, every chill, was another reminder that comfort had no seat at his table. His hands were blistered, his throat dry, his legs ached with the weight of miles behind him. But he did not beg for rest. He did not plead for ease. He had learned long ago that struggle sharpens the spirit, and silence strengthens the will. The sky above turned a deeper shade. Not quite night, but no longer day. That sacred hour where shadows stretch, and the world seems to hold its breath. It was here, in the quiet between light and dark, that he felt most alive. He saw a twisted tree growing alone on a cliff, its branches gnarled, its trunk cracked, but still it stood. Still it reached for the sky. Still it grew, not in a garden, but in defiance. He nodded at it, as if it understood, because he too was not meant to bloom where it was easy. He had grown in drought, in fire, in exile. He climbed higher now. The terrain steep and unforgiving. Loose stones threatened his footing, but he moved with certainty, not because he never stumbled, but because he no longer feared the fall. Pain had taught him balance. Failure had taught him grace. He passed the skeleton of an old structure, a rusted tower leaning into the sky, its metal bones exposed, its purpose long forgotten. And yet, there it stood, not because it was strong, but because it had refused to collapse. And that was enough. He could feel his breath deepening, the altitude tightening his lungs, his chest rising and falling like waves in a storm. But he did not slow. He embraced the burn. He welcomed the trembling in his legs, the sweat rolling down his spine. Because this was the forge, not made of fire, but of cold, and pressure, and silence. This was where the lone wolf became something more. Not just a wanderer, but a weapon. Not just a man, but a movement. He thought back to the nights he used to cry in silence, fists clenched beneath blankets, eyes burning with frustration. He remembered the sound of others laughing at his dreams, the sting of being mocked for wanting more. But what they did not know, what they could never know, was that those moments were not his undoing. They were his ignition. They lit something in him that could not be dimmed, not by time, not by failure, not even by fear. And now he was walking proof that the fire still burned, that the vision still lived, that the hunger had only grown. He reached the crest of a rocky ridge, looked out across a valley of shadows. It stretched endlessly, a sea of uncertainty, a graveyard of old dreams. But he did not flinch. He whispered, "To reach the summit, you must pass through the silence of the forgotten." And then he descended. The path was barely visible. Roots curled like claws. Branches swayed like warning hands. But he moved through it all, his eyes fixed on a light only he could see. He stepped over bones of fallen animals, signs that nature was not kind. But he had never expected kindness. He had expected war. And that was what he had prepared for. Every bruise, every scar, every rejection had been training. And now, the world would feel what he had become, not because he needed to prove himself, but because he could no longer contain the force inside. He was no longer seeking approval. He was claiming territory, not land, but identity, purpose, legacy. He passed a pool of still water, his reflection rippling back at him. He saw the eyes, hard, haunted, honest, no illusion, no facade. He saw a man who had bled without witnesses, healed without applause, fought without allies. He saw someone forged by abandonment, tempered by time, driven by something deeper than fame or success. He saw the lone wolf, and he nodded, not in pride, in understanding. This was who he had always been, not created, but uncovered. He left the water behind, steps surer now, movements more fluid. He was becoming part of the mountain, part of the wind, part of the silence, not above it, not against it, but one with it, because when you walk alone long enough, you no longer resist the elements. You become them. You stop fearing the storm, because you are the storm. He climbed a final stretch of jagged rock, each pull upward echoing in his muscles, each breath raw with determination. At the summit, he stood in the open sky, no longer below anything, no longer beneath doubt, or fear, or the weight of expectation. He looked out over the world that once ignored him, and he smiled, not because they were watching now, but because he no longer cared if they ever did. The view did not make him feel large. It made him feel precise, intentional, free. There was no one beside him, no one clapping, no one cheering, only wind, only sky, only silence. And yet, it was more than enough, because the summit is not a place for the loud. It is a place for the relentless. And he was the embodiment of relentless. The world below would keep spinning. People would go on doubting, mocking, forgetting. But he would keep walking, keep climbing, keep becoming, because he had chosen the harder path, because he had tasted the fire, and drank from the well of solitude, and came out unbroken, because he had walked alone, like a lone wolf, and that had made all the difference. He stood there, above the noise, above the fear, above the limits the world had tried to place on him. And in that stillness, in that sacred silence, he did not feel alone. He felt complete, because he had not walked this path to be seen. He had walked it to see himself, to meet the man hidden beneath years of doubt, buried under layers of pain, shaped by fire, hardened by truth. He had learned that solitude was not a curse. It was a crucible, a place where weak voices faded, and the voice of purpose grew louder. So now, as the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the peaks in golden light, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I was never lost. I was only becoming." And to those still walking, still doubting, still afraid, he left behind no map, no shortcut, no promise of ease, only this truth. If you are brave enough to walk alone, strong enough to embrace the silence, and relentless enough to keep going when the world turns its back, you will discover something extraordinary, not in the world, but in yourself. Walk alone, like a lone wolf, Not because you must, but because greatness demands it.